Hi there, I'm Keith Cawley, and this is Thrive, a Bridgestone Americas podcast where we explore our company through compelling conversations with teammates across our organization. The term ENLITEN has become a more frequent part of our Bridgestone vocabulary in the past several months as our strategic vision and product roadmap continue to take shape on our sustainable solutions journey. The basic concept of ENLITEN is a commitment to deliver both maximum performance and sustainability together in end-to-end operations, products, and our technology all across Bridgestone, where before we often had to sacrifice a little bit of one to gain in the other. But there's a lot involved in how we're going to get all of that done. So today we turn to Bridgestone America's Chief Operating Officer, Scott Damon, to help us break it all down. We hope you enjoy this conversation. Well, we are joined today by Scott Damon, Chief Operating Officer of Bridgestone Americas and returning guest of the podcast, but first time in studio. It's good to see you here at the table, Scott.
Great to be back, Keith. Love the new setup here. Kind of was expecting cigars and bourbon, a little Joe Rogan, but we'll settle for coffee.
It's the start in the morning when we finish in the afternoon. You never know
what. If I'd got that coveted afternoon slot, it would have been great.
What the afternoon will bring when we wrap up. I wanted your voice to be full and pure for the entire conversation, but we'll get there. But since you are a returning guest, we kind of covered a little bit in your first visit about your background, your journey, the road through Bandag and up through Bridgestone. So would instead like to say, hey, it's been about 2 years since we've had you on the podcast. A lot's happened between now and then. Are there things that have stood out to you? The world is a little bit different for everybody, including Bridgestone. But what have the last 2 years been like from the COO seat?
Well, I would say if you look at global Bridgestone, I think we spent the last 3 years probably tackling three things. One, we laid the foundation for growth. Certainly that's the Sustainable Solutions Company. Mm-hmm. Basically broaden our offering beyond tires to tire-centric solutions and tapping our feet into mobility solutions. The big thing I think we also did is we basically tried to tackle negative legacies, try to get back to basics, making tires, selling tires. And I would say the third thing you saw globally from the company was just kind of cleaning up our footprint, businesses that didn't tie into that strategy, et cetera. So manufacturing locations that weren't as effective or businesses that didn't fit the strategy, all kind of exited our portfolio, so to speak. But over those three pillars, I would say we've accomplished a lot globally. And if you dive into BSAM, certainly we've all dealt with, just a tumultuous 3 years, supply chain issues, a cyber incident, which hadn't happened when we last talked. I think the only thing we didn't face in that 3 year period was a biblical plague. And despite
we got a lot of wood around, everybody. We're okay.
Exactly.
We're okay.
No locust here. But in general, I would say if you look back, all those factors, we've accomplished probably more than the company ever thought we could. I mean, we're having record profit years. We've taken businesses like BSRO 2 consecutive years of profit growth that we'd never seen. Our consumer replacement business has doubled what we've done in 2019. Retreading's on a trajectory that's just fabulous. Yeah. Our ag business has recovered from a 10-year drought, so to speak. I mean, just, example after example of successes that you would look back and say, despite all that we faced, the stress and the wear and tear on the organization, I don't know if we would accomplish much more than we did.
Yeah. Well, I'd like to hear you say, as part of those three pillars, we talk about the growth, the foundation for growth, and we've had this big focus on sustainable solutions, mobility solutions, but you were also number 2 in there as we got back to making and selling tires, and I think a lot of people thought those things originally would be at odds, growing up this new, growth portfolio and future solutions business, but we continue to remind people it's all rooted in that core foundation of selling tires, and I think that's hopefully come through a little bit in the last couple of years.
Yeah, I think it's balanced, and I think the global CEO would use the term tackling negative legacies, and that's really what he meant, is like, let's get back and make sure we have laser focus on being great at that, and then we actually have to set up a vision and a strategy to help us move not just with that, but beyond that, to be competitive in the future.
Yeah. Well, and a good segue from where I would like to go from here to start. You said the $1 million question, and one of the things we wanted to talk to you about is ENLITEN. So a term that we've had on the podcast a couple of times. Teammates have been hearing a little bit more about it over the last maybe year and a half, 2 years. It's going to become very forward in really everything as we look at the products and offerings of the future. You started to talk a little bit about the word premium there. What does Enlighten really mean at its base sense to you as we get into this kind of world?
All right. Well, the first thing I would say when I think about this is our North Star that Paulo has laid out: foundations, vision, sustainable solutions company, business, ABC business, so tires, tire-centric solution mobility, and then team. That's still very sound. And we hear the term Enlighten business strategy, and then we hear the term Enlighten technology. So I'll try to separate those. So Enlighten business strategy, if we think about those 4 portfolios, you're thinking about them in a vertical way, right? So Enlighten, the business strategy, is really more internal so that we get our organization thinking about it horizontally. So the entire value chain, from the materials we buy to the products we make, design and make through R&D, to how we ship them to customers, the solutions beyond the tire that are going to help us in the sense, think, act part of the digital transformation, how we measure that and feedback that loop back to procurement and R&D. That's a horizontal look at the value chain when it comes to how we go to market. And each of those, consumer, TBR, specialty, diversified, can be looked in a lens of how that matrix vertically works across Enlighten horizontally. Now, where I would say from a customer side, that can be confusing. It's even confusing to our people, but it's really calibrating the company on Enlighten so that we think about it from the view of premium, solutions, sustainability. So an example of that as we operate internally would be, all right, our procurement team is working on a journey of making sure we deliver Dantatsu product performance, but have a complementary sustainable material component to that. As we make the tires, we certainly would make them in a factory that's more sustainable, more intelligent digitally. And again, working our way down to our sales and our BMS teams taking products that are embedded with sensors that can basically talk to vehicles in the connected car park, capturing data, informing the user, helping them be more productive and cost efficient. And all the way down the value chain, it's just calibrating the organization on an Enlightened business strategy. Now, from a customer lens, when you see the side of the tire, I would say Enlighten is just more the tech stack. So what are the material components that are going to define the performance criteria that kind of meet our targeted, aspirational goals in terms of performance and sustainability? So that could be the traditional ones you think about with tires: rolling resistance, tread wear, wet traction. But now you throw in an EV component of PSR, and it's noise, and it's percent CO2 that you're basically contributing as the vehicle moves. So you have other aspects of the tech stack that you're designing to solve for both the performance of the tire and the sustainability aspect on how we're measuring the tire. I don't know if that simplifies it enough, for the team, but that's how I think it. So the customer's not going to think about it as a business strategy. They're just going to see Enlighten, like we had with the Copia, but that tech stack has that complementary performance and sustainability aspect to it. The way we run the business horizontally is got to keep the focus on all those aspects in harmony versus just thinking about the world function by function in a vertical world.
Because we're designing the tires that will be, I think that's the other question besides what is Enlighten, is what makes a tire Enlighten. If it says Enlighten on it, or if we see the roadmap of products for the future, this will be an Enlighten product. And that's kind of what you just described. The tires are being engineered differently with maybe different materials, different design processes, serving different performance attributes. And that comes from all different aspects of the value chain. So it's the Enlighten activity from all the areas that helps deliver what ultimately is an enlightened tire that the consumers will see. But
Correct.
It feeds from the different areas.
Right. And it also has add-ons. So like I might have an embedded tire sensor that will also connect to one of our fleet management software systems. So again, the product customer sees Enlighten, but your Enlighten business strategy is touching all aspects of the business.
Yeah. Well, that's part of the fun, right? When we talk about these things internally, we're getting everybody on board, but then we all have different parts of where we then deliver it, and the message can get out there. But that's very helpful. To me, we'll continue to break it down for anybody else who needs to understand.
It is complicated, but that's probably the simplest way I could describe it.
It's helpful because I think we see a lot of the presentations and we hear a lot of it, but then to have the depth and context behind it, we don't always have the time to dig deep. I think one of the other things that was curious as I looked at a lot of materials was we talk about commonality in approach, but differences in execution, which is a little bit of that. We want to design tires that are a little bit different, but there's part of this that is also trying to simplify certain parts of maybe the manufacturing process, right? Mm-hmm. So at a sense, maybe to some people, those things seem at odds. How do you make something more common together, but then differentiate even more in premium? How does that all fit together as not being at odds, I guess?
So I would say, where we're trying to simplify manufacturing is, we basically make a carcass. It has a belt package and a tread. So we would like in a common size and application to have a consistency in the material approach for that carcass and that belt package. And so a good example in consumer, if you're making a touring tire or if you're making something in the all-terrain segment of light truck tires, we want to have commonality in the tire size there. So the materials will be, sustainable, circular materials. They'll have a functionality that is consistent in that application, but we'll differentiate based on certain segments with the tread pattern itself. So to your point, how are we trying to simplify things is we don't want to customize every component, every material going into every tire size. That complicates that. And typically happens in original equipment, and you'll see a convergence of our product line in ENLITEN where that module 1, module 2, or that carcass by size and application is converging on commonality and simplification. But the tread pattern, so the design of the pattern, the way we mix the materials, the new materials coming in, will be very different based on the application segment of the product. So, and again, ENLITEN, that's what we're trying to tackle there is the simplification and manufacturing of those first modules and basically the differentiation on that third module. But a convergence, so, whether it's an OE or replacement, et cetera, it's a simpler process, simpler way to do things than we do it today.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned right there at the end was one of my next questions about the mix of products and customers that we're targeting when we focus on ENLITEN moving forward. And as you try to make this evolution on the product and the technology in it, an OE mix versus a replacement tire mix or even into the TBR space, I guess, how do you attack that? Because some of it may be working with an OE to custom design a tire that fits and maybe that unlocks, or how do we approach the mix across making the tires ENLITEN in these different portfolios?
But again, remember the portfolio and consumer is premium with basically a car park that will be all EVs, right? So you are going to have some consistency there. Of course, we will design for replacement and then tune for OE with the tread pattern. That's the strategy. Yeah. But again, a tread pattern and a material that you're using in that tread for the Ford F-150 Lightning EV, vastly different than a Tesla Model 3, right? So you're going to solve for different things. But of course, with EV, I would say there's consistency that we have to look at in a new world where the vehicles are heavier, the wear on the tires will be more accelerated, the noise in the cabin has to be addressed with some kind of noise abatement. We're using sponge. And of course, we're designing it so that the tire can digitally talk to the vehicle. So all those things are in that suite that the OEs will all want. But that electric vehicle or hybrid electric vehicle, we're going to move towards that pace in consumer.
Yeah, and a couple of these questions sourced from some things we've heard from teammates following town halls and some of the conversations internally. And I think we look at this sustainable solutions journey, this talk about premium tires and ENLITEN, and a couple of people, curious, and they're like, what makes us think that the consumers and customers will embrace this more premium tire, this move to the future? We see a lot of competition across the industry from maybe brands that are staying core to just basic tires. What makes us think so much about making this shift and this evolution to premium and how the drivers of the world will respond to it?
Well, I think, for one I think we're moving to a world that's converging towards fleets. And so I think it lends itself well to a world where you probably have less SKUs. You're trying to solve for things like productivity, cost, safety, and certainly the sustainability aspect. You're looking at products that need to be reused several times. So the retread aspect, which right now sits in commercial, but we clearly seeing it moving into last mile delivery vans and the consumer space. So all those things should give you confidence that this strategy will play out well there. But even in, a fleet of one or a consumer's car today, we compete in the premium space today. We don't solve every customer's need at the value side of the equation. We try to, but again, I think it's really around keeping ourselves at a certain share of premium, but allowing us a more accretive way to solve the problems there long term. So there's always going to be a space in the premium space. And I think in the consumer world, on individual cars, we're going to be set with this because this is going to keep helping us add value there, add value to OEs, and as we converge on what I would call a fleetification, shared mobility, people in shared transit, this is going to move to a fleet model like we have in commercial, and these things set up quite well for that.
Yeah. And what I guess is our own road for ENLITEN specifically, when will this become tangible maybe to consumers when they start to see ENLITEN on the sides of the tires?
There's already products rolled out in Europe, and
go.
I would say next year in consumer for us, 2 big products, Turanza EV. So if you have a touring line, if you're running a Model 3, Model S, we've got 5 sizes launched originally, but many more coming out where we're really bringing out our own EV line in a touring segment that has ENLITEN technology. And probably the most exciting you hear Paula and Ricardo talk about is basically the Potenza Sport all season. So we've had to refresh an old line, and it's doing quite well in Tire Rack, but this really encompasses our state-of-the-art. We have a new ultra-high body ply that's ultra-high tensile body ply going into this for ride and handling. We got some new technology in the tread and the pattern, and it's going to be, I think, 90 sizes or plus. So I don't even know if I have that right, but it's just we're covering every segment of high-performance products with an all-season flavor, and it will be a big product launch for us next year in consumer. But that's just the start. I think we have a commercial steer tire coming out in 2024, and we're methodically upgrading the product line over the next 6 years with a large percentage of it being ENLITEN technology.
Yeah, and I think that's something that always helps make people understand more is that this isn't something that's a 10 to 12 year down the road vision. It's tangible in the very near future and will become part of existence for us every day.
Yeah, this isn't a 20-year plan for sure.
We're not mapping out
we're not
the
that
more
patient
layers
in this company.
Well, I think we talked a little bit about manufacturing too. I mean, you obviously are deep into that world, and there's been big announcements of investments at a lot of our America's facilities in the last maybe 18 months in Canada, the U.S., into Latin America as well. How much does ENLITEN and the strategy, I'd have to assume, play into that pretty significantly? But I guess what do all of those announcements also, how do they all connect to this conversation?
Yeah, I would say the big, I guess what I would structure for us on capital for manufacturing is we're going to spend over $3 billion over the next 3 years.
Yeah, always bringing the fun facts. We like it. Yes.
I know, but that's double what we spend on capital and manufacturing in any given year. So you're basically doubling our capital investment over this MVP to add capacities, but they're really structured around complementing what's going to be necessary for the technology in ENLITEN. So we'll complete our 6th tandem mixer installation. There's a lot of extrusion technology to complement the ENLITEN technology we have to produce. There's a lot of tire assembly technology. So to your point, in that capital, it isn't just capacity add for volume, but it's got to complement the technology and capabilities for manufacturing to produce the products that are going to fit into this suite of ENLITEN technology. So big numbers, a lot to get done in 3 years, but of course it complements that roadmap.
Yeah, you can't do it all in a vacuum. Every part has to come together and move.
And it's that ENLITEN business strategy, as we talked about.
The horizontal across the vertical pillars. That's going to help.
It's all matrices these days.
We will visualize all of it. It's going to be good. Would love to ask a couple other questions since we have you maybe away from ENLITEN, but still part of this whole conversation that we've been having. You're a big Bandag guy. Retreads, you mentioned in the early part of the conversation, have really been moving in a big way. We're doubling down there. What have we seen maybe in the last couple of years on retread, and what have we done to kind of invest more and amplify it, and where do we see this going in the future?
Well, obviously, we're doubling down on retread. I would say in the tire-centric solution or our new vision, it's at the epicenter of that. Probably over the last 12 to 13 years, we've had negative keggers on retread. So it's been declining like soda. The last 2 years, that trend has reversed. So you could say, well, what's driving it? I think this pivot to basically the impact of public companies and their impact on their carbon emissions and what retreading can do there has kind of made a lot of companies rethink that weren't already considering it. So that's certainly one to help. I also just think in terms of the available supply of product in the market, it kind of drove retreading back to the forefront. So in the Americas, to your point, 2 good years of turning that trend around. I think we had the largest volume we've had since 2015 or 16 this year. And next year, we will produce and sell more retreading volume than we have since 1999. So that's back before Band-Ag was acquired by Bridgestone. So, and when you talk about the customer side and sustainability, I always tell Paula, you remember that old Barbara Mandrell song, I was country when country wasn't cool. Well, we were sustainable before sustainable was cool with retreading. So, but a lot focus in the Americas to drive it, and we drive the globe on this. So obviously BMS has to set up a lot of structural changes in Europe to drive that, but a lot of tailwinds for retreading, and we want to take advantage of it.
Yeah, and BMS being Bridgestone Mobility Solutions on that acronym right there. That is another growing out the solutions portfolio as we move. Also COO related, the last time we chatted, there was global supply chain issues and there were shipping and transportation problems all over the world. It's been about 20 months since that conversation. Anything changed?
Well, yeah, I would say cross our fingers. We expect a volatile year in demand, but I would say, ocean freight capacity, raw material capacity, just in general, the supply chain has become less volatile and I think more stable. So we're hoping this year to have a more consistent year in terms of managing supply and demand, and our team really needs that. So I'm definitely wishful thinking that it will be better than the last 3. And certainly adaptable. But I think, one of the things that our global CEO and Paulo respect about the organization is the world is going to be more volatile.
Yeah.
And we've got to be more flexible and agile. So, we need to balance people's personal space, personal time dealing with this. But I'm really proud of what our team's done with not the best of systems to address it in general. But overall, I expect things to be a lot better than they've been the last 3 years.
Yeah. The system is another thing we're working on as everything connects together, right, as we move into the future to continue building and evolving. What are you most excited about then? We just started 2023. I know we've going through at this time of year our customer for business meetings, for consumer, for commercial, the leadership conference for BSRO. What are you excited about from your seat right now?
Well, I would say, we got to bring this vision to life. So I think we've put a lot of pieces in place to try to accelerate. So we formed a new BMS organization. We like to think the supply chain is stable. We've got to deliver on the capital I just talked about in manufacturing to set us up for success as we exit this decade. I think BSRO, like I said, here we are looking at BSRO on 2 years of record profits. So we're basically saying, how do we add new stores? How do we refresh this? How do we look at the offering different? Whether it's Firestone Direct, whether it's an EV charging stations, you name it. I just think there's so much momentum in this strategy that we've basically been lighting small fires on. They're going to culminate into something much larger. So I think people should be excited about it. Now, of course, we have to sequence and plan how we do things. We've got to measure things, but I think there's a lot of reasons to believe that we're going to be successful despite where the market goes just based on what we've built.
Yeah. One bite at a time, right? But not patiently, but with focus and determination. Thank you so much for the time, Scott. Really appreciate the insight, the ability to try to break some of these things down into some simpler layers, and hopefully something that we can continue to now tell teammates about in a way that they can all connect, and especially as they see it take shape, they'll be able to connect to it more as well. So appreciate the time.
Appreciate it, Keith. Thanks so much.
Hopefully, Scott's perspective can help make these important strategic initiatives a little bit easier to grasp, especially when you pair this conversation with some of our other episodes from this season related to smart and green manufacturing. And when you add in the excitement around the new products we have coming to market this year and next, you really see the ENLITEN strategy start to take shape. If you like this chat, be sure to listen to some of our other conversations wherever it is you listen to podcasts. And remember, you can also watch episodes on our Bridgestone America's YouTube page. Wherever it is you hear us or watch us, feel free to give us a rating or a review. Tell us how we're doing. And you can always send a question, episode idea, or just some general feedback via email at thrivepodcast@bfu.com. bridgestoneusa.com. Thanks for listening. I'm Keith Cawley, telling you to keep on keeping on, and remember that at Bridgestone, today, tomorrow, together, we thrive. Be good, everybody.